real excited about this program. Another year's gone by, and new experiences, new perspectives. And the way we've organized this for today is we're going to have a lecture, sort of roundtable top discussion about opening statement, because we all have kind of different views and different ways of doing things, which hopefully we can pass some things on that'll be helpful in your practices. But we're going to sort of do it in a loose format this morning for this first hour, and then in the second hour I'm going to present one of the opening statements I presented it maybe 6 months ago in a trial. Unfortunately, it hung 11-1, one against us, strongly against us. You know, they somehow got on our jury, but it'll show some of the visuals and the structure, you know, that I found to be successful in medical malpractice, because these are very unique cases. I mean, they are the most complicated. You come in the face of the most biased jurors a lot of times. Less so now, in my view. I think jurors are, you know, the scales are falling from their eyes and realize that doctors and hospitals are not as infallible as they may have been at one time. But it's still very challenging cases. And my personal view is that opening, next to jury selection, is the most important part of trial for so many reasons, much more so than closing, cross, all those other parts of the trial. So that's the mission this morning, and today is going to be about opening statement. I know we've got breakout groups this afternoon. We're going to work with folks and let people get on their feet and put some things into practice and hopefully provide some things to take home. So that's the goal today. And I invited two of my close friends, Ben and Josh. We all met the Inner Circle inaugural, or our first session about 3 years ago, and all do medical malpractice. And we collaborate, we cajole, we commiserate, all those things. But they've been very successful in their own right. I don't know how this escaped the introduction, but Josh just got a $960 million verdict 2 weeks ago against Alex Jones, which, you know, it sounds like a huge accomplishment, but it's Alex Jones, so it is a huge accomplishment. And Ben's had some great verdicts as well recently. So I'm going to just start with Josh and ask you to sort of discuss your thoughts about opening statement, how you approach it, and your views on how it help makes you successble.
Well, just to pick up on Alex Jones, you know, I said Lloyd asked me about it. I said it was easy. My easiest malpractice case was harder than the Alex Jones case. And I think it sort of picks up on what Lloyd just said. These are challenging cases, and also the Alex Jones case was really easy. But I think my approach to opening statement, and a couple of thoughts that hopefully will help. Number one is that I imagine walking in as a juror to a courtroom and the formality of a courtroom, and being, you know, a little bit unnerved by what I'm walking into. It's so formal, the judge is there, everybody's standing, you know, it's very intimidating. And so in any opening statement, the first thing I want to do is make the jury comfortable. Like they're coming into my home is what I think about. And so my job, I see, is not to blow the jury away with soaring rhetoric or how smart I am about medicine. My job is initially to make the jury comfortable.
How do you do that? You tell jokes?
Lots of jokes.
Yeah.
Lots of props, slapstick. But actually what I do is, and I would recommend anybody doing this in any opening, is first of all, I don't just launch into my opening. I don't get up there and start talking lawyer like they might expect. I just stood up, I feel the presence of the courtroom. I let the jury sit in. And I think you want a few extra seconds there to feel like people are waiting for you to talk. Wait for the jury to sit down, and you step away from your podium or your notes or your screen, and you just welcome them like it's to your home. However you would like to do it, just be yourself. It's such an advantage to go first, and I think that comfort is very disarming. And so it's a soft opening for me. And then I'll introduce the people I work with. Why do I do that? Because juries like to see that you work with other human beings, especially non-lawyers. So if my paralegal's there, introduce my paralegal. If my legal assistant's there, I'll introduce my legal assistant. Why? Because they're coming into my house and I want them to know who everybody is. And I think this is a very good way. Now you can start talking about your case. And then I don't want to hijack the conversation, but then I'll just go into a little bit of demystifying a few things. I want to talk about what the rule is that doctors are bound by. And usually I'll just take the two words from our statute, which is they're bound to act with care and skill. And I just say, look, I mean, and if they don't act with carefully or skillfully, and somebody gets harmed, they're responsible. And if you think that's no different really than a bus driver. Bus drivers have to act carefully and skillfully, and if they don't, they can harm somebody, and they'd be held accountable. And just because doctors have a very high status, we all look up to doctors, and they get paid a lot and everything, but their standard is no different than that of a bus driver, for example, or a mechanic. What have I just done? I've just sort of taken the temperature down a little bit on holding a doctor accountable. Some of you asked about the halo effect, and I'm trying to work on the halo effect, and I also want to work on that standard of care, which is, I don't know about your state, but when the judge reads the standard of care, it's cringeworthy. I'm like, how will I ever? It's over. Why don't I just go home? And so you really want to own the language of the standard of care, I think, but just you want to lower your burden. I could talk more about some ideas if you have the terminology or standard of care. And then I'll just do a soft, very gentle description of the medicine. I'll go over that later. But I don't want to tell the story until I've established this sort of warmth with the jury, taken the temperature down a little bit. I don't want to hit them over the head with a lot of information. But that's not the only way to do openings, and I think I'm interested to hear what Lloyd and Ben say about this.
Yeah, just one quick point, and I want to hear from Ben. So some of the introductions, the soft part that you're talking about, that might be more unique to Connecticut because y'all's jury selection is very different, at least than Georgia. They have one on, it's like it lasts a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Our jury selection, yeah, only state in the nation has individual voir dire, so it could take 2-3 weeks to pick a jury.
Yeah, so in Georgia we'll have, which I imagine is most of y'all states, will have jury selection with big groups at one time and hopefully individual follow-up. But those points you're talking about, we try to accomplish that during jury selection. Introducing everybody in the courtroom, establishing yourself as sort of a human being, and maybe there are places for humor in this business.
Absolutely.
And it's so important if you can find an appropriate place to let that pressure get released with a joke. I mean, not a goofy joke, but it could be a sports joke, or it could be just something to lighten the mood. But I think that's really good. Really good
so everything I said could be applied, I think, to those box voir dires. Yeah.
Ben, talk to us. What are they doing up in Maine?
Well, let me share that in a minute. But who here has been to a seminar where you've heard about where someone's presented on opening statements, and you've heard things such as, the case is won in the opening? Has anyone heard that kind of thing? I definitely have. Or another thing I've heard is, you need to win your case in the first 2 minutes of your opening. And I think there's a lot of bumper stickers or slogans that go around out there that might sell seats to conferences. But I think particularly in medical malpractice cases, none of those things are true. And all they do is ratchet up the pressure for you in an opening in a way that's unrealistic and honestly is counterproductive. Because like Josh says, if you go out there guns blazing from the get-go, you're really going to you're going to put some of the jurors off. They're going to close down and not be willing to listen to the story that's about to unfold. And some of that can be accomplished, as Lloyd alluded to, if you have more opportunity to do voir dire. So I like to think, I practice in a state where we often don't get very much opportunity to do voir dire, and then I practice in other states where we have full opportunity to do voir dire. So I've done it both ways. And I don't know, who here's in a state where you have you can do attorney voir dire, open-ended, there's no limits on it for the most part? and many of you are in states where there are limits to what you can do. An opening is just very different if you have voir dire versus if you don't. Because if you have voir dire, a lot of what Josh accomplishes at the beginning of the opening can be accomplished in voir dire. And I think of the beginning of my opening as really just an extension of the conversation that I've already started with the jurors in voir dire. So it's not a new thing. I start out by usually something to the effect of, as we were discussing yesterday, it's really, we all agree that it's really important, and then fill in the blank of what your case is about, because you've already discussed that. They've already affirmed that that's something that they believe in. And it's powerful because it's not you telling them what to believe, it's you repeating things that they've already told you they do believe, which happen to be the fundamental kind of issue in your case. So number one is ratchet down the damn pressure on yourself in opening. You don't need to win your case in opening. You certainly don't need to win it in the first 2 minutes of your opening. And by the way, you're not going to. Okay, medical malpractice cases, I think that lore of the opening may apply in a 2 or 3 day car wreck case where by the time they're deliberating, they still have that opening fresh in the mind, and you've set a tone that is going to carry through to deliberations. I don't know how many of you tried med mal cases, but they tend to go on a long time. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of witnesses and experts, and by the time they get to deliberations, they don't remember your opening very much. And if the evidence doesn't come in well, and you don't close well, you're going to lose, no matter what you did in the opening. So number one is just take some of that pressure off yourself. Number two is, I like to think about medical cases as a journey where I learn something about the medicine that I enjoy doing the cases because I'm interested in that. It's enjoyable to learn new things. Jurors also like to learn, and we are at our best as lawyers, I think, when we're teaching. Teaching also has the advantage of it's not off-putting to people. It's not confrontational. It's not adversarial. So you can do that early on in the opening before you get to the advocacy, and you can lay a foundation for everything your case is about and everything they need to know in a way that jurors appreciate, because they're learning and they're anxious. As Josh said, they're anxious about this process. So you're alleviating some of that anxiety because now you're arming them with tools that they're going to need to decide the case. So teaching a little bit, but it's got to be in an engaging way that's interesting. It can't be boring like some lecture on medicine. You have to draw them into it in a way, and I think Lloyd will show you. He uses a lot of visuals, so do I, but I think visuals for teaching is really important. So to me, the principle of what the case is about, which usually comes out of voir dire, teaching the jury what they need to know about the medicine, which is just a very narrow part of medicine, not everything in the world, just what they need to know. Telling the story of your case in a way that answers 3 basic questions. What were the doctors or the hospitals required to do that they didn't do, that they should have done? When were they supposed to do that thing? And what difference would that have made? Because if you can't answer those questions, you don't have a case. And the jury needs to be able to answer all of those questions in order to find for you. And that should organically come out of the story you're telling after they understand the medicine. It should be very obvious what they were supposed to do, which they didn't do, which I like to call bad medicine. The bad medicine is what they did. The good medicine is what they were supposed to do. When were they supposed to do it? because that always makes a difference in our case, right? The when is really important. And what the hell difference did it make? Because if it didn't make any difference anyway, you're going to lose. So the story covers those three things, and then I like to finish my opening with kind of the more, now I've earned the right to get a little bit more heated, a little bit more adversarial, and talk about some of the, prime them for what I think of as the kind of motive issues. What's really going on here? I don't want to pull the curtain back too much on that yet. I want that to unfold organically over the course of the trial. So it's sort of a teaser of what's coming, but I want to plant that seed in their mind so when they start hearing about those things later, they're going to have a framework to, attach it to.
Do you ask for money in opening?
Absolutely. I think it's malpractice to not ask for money, or to, if you're not allowed to ask for a specific dollar amount, to do your best in whatever your jurisdiction permits to explain to the jury what we're doing here. Because our job is to get money for our clients, period, end of story. And if we're not honest and upfront about that and direct and just say the words, the jury knows that anyway.
What are the words you say? I want money.
Well, if I
Show me the
were
money.
Please, do you actually?
if I were channeling
ask
Josh,
for
what I would say is, at the end of this trial, you should be returning a verdict of $960 million against Mr.
Actually,
Jones.
billion is what I
Or if I'm Mr. Bell, I would say, I would ask you to return a verdict of at least $75 million. Now, we're in Maine. No one's ever heard of that kind of money in Maine. So I ask for things like $5 million or $10 million or $1 million or whatever, but you have to ask for it. If you don't ask for it, you won't get it. And I learned that the hard way over many, many years. I always felt uncomfortable asking. Nobody likes asking for money, right? It's one of the least fun things to do. If anybody asks you to raise money for an organization, you have to call your friends. It's one of the most uncomfortable things you can do, but that's our job. So if you're not going to go do that, what are you doing there? So absolutely, you have to ask, but you don't necessarily have to say, I want, we need X dollars. There can be ways of asking that. So
you ask for, but you do put a number. You don't just introduce the concept.
I have Meryl do my opening, and she asked for it, right, Meryl?
Because you were too spineless to ask for it.
Exactly.
First of all, I was listening to Ben. I'm thinking we've never talked about openings, but I'm thinking that sounds exactly like me in terms of the education. And if you do that right and you get to your story, you see jurors who didn't know anything about the medical issue go like this when they hear about the doctor. They just learned it, but they can't believe that what he did. And so if you've done that right, you have anchored the medicine to the story, and you reflect back on it with you go back to that guy. Remember, I just told you that doctors shouldn't take unnecessary risks. They should have looked into this, ST segment depression. Now, it might have been normal, might not have, but what did this doctor do? And then I literally had a juror go, they were ready to find against the doctor. And so but I just have to defend my grievous malpractice. I do not ask for money in my opening. I never have, and it's not my style. I think, why don't I ask for it? Because I just don't think I've earned the credibility yet. I want the jury waiting, okay, it's okay, you can ask for money. I want to be the last person to think that's okay. Uh-oh. Yeah, that's,
Oh my gosh.
I don't ask for money in voir dire. Oh, we talk about the concept, we want to make sure that jurors are comfortable, that they don't come in with any artificial limits. You say hi, but of course you have to say or low, But
So we have a
kind of
disagreement on
conceptually,
this.
we do.
We have a fundamental disagreement
On voir dire?
on the idea of asking for money.
In openings.
In starting in jury selection, we start.
Do you?
I think it's important to start conditioning the jury in getting commitments in jury selection. So we'll ask them. Like I did this last trial, and say, if the evidence supports a verdict as much as $200 million, And you practice saying that because it sounds hard to say initially, but it's easier. If the evidence supports that, and you just kind of let it hang out there. How many people feel like they could not even consider it, regardless of the evidence? And you haven't heard the evidence, of course, but just as a concept, no matter what the evidence, you will never consider as much as $200 million. And you'll get some hands, and you'll get some causal challenges if they dig in on that and say, so no matter what the evidence, you would never consider a verdict of $200 million. Now you've said 3 times and 4 times. And people catch on, and they realize that they're not really giving up anything to say, well, yeah, I could consider it. I'm a reasonable person, depends on what the evidence is. I could consider it. And you collect those commitments. So I know we're supposed to be talking about opening, but when you fast forward to closing, you can remind them, everybody that's sitting here raised their hand and said they could consider a verdict as much as $200 million if the evidence supported it. Well, has the evidence supported it? Now you've got the evidence, hopefully, to support it. But I think it's
What about in openings, Lloyd?
Well, I tie it into openings too. So I'll get to the end of my opening, and this is influenced by David Ball. I think it's good, is to say, they've now seen the story of the case. They now understand how horrific the damages are. And you'll say, and I'll have a chance to come back to you and close an argument, and I'll have a chance to talk to you about what this case is worth. And you will understand why I'll be asking you for a verdict of $200 million and close an argument. And if you don't run from it, you don't hide from it, you just keep repeating it. And then what happens, or at least happened in this trial, is the defense picks up on it because they think they're mocking you with it. And defense lawyers they're full of mockery. And they love opportunities to be sarcastic and rude. And that's great. Those are gifts. Because you don't respond to it. You pretend like you're not hearing the biting nature of it, and you stay centered. I think they love them to mock. And they'll pick up the number and they'll say, he's asking for $200 million. He's asking for $200 million. You're going to come here and ask for $200 million, $200 million. What they don't
ramming in the
just
$200 million.
Right. And what they're doing is they're normalizing it, right. And there's a lot of psychology and studies behind this about how our brains work, and something that might be shocking at first becomes normalized. And we saw this with the stimulus when they were talking about $600 billion of stimulus and $200 billion. After a while, it's like, if it's not at least $100 billion, we're not even, I can't support that. It's just our way our minds work, and I think that works effectively in the jury process. If the case is legitimately, and you believe it, you have to believe it. You can't just pretend. You have to, believe what the number that you're asking for. A couple of quick thoughts on my perspective on opening, and that may be our only point of disagreement because y'all make great points. But a couple others that haven't been touched on. I probably spend more time preparing my opening statement, almost than any other part of the trial. And I'm terrible at time management, so I'll find myself just engrossed in preparing my opening slide deck. And then I'm looking at the calendar. I'm like, wait, I've only got 6 days before trial. I really need to work on some examinations and get the rest of my trial ready. But I think opening is really important. I don't believe you win your case in opening. I do think you set yourself up to win because you establish your credibility. You're essentially proving your case during the opening, at least the way I advocate doing it. It's heavy on exhibits. It's heavy on medical records. I say heavy. It's not oppressive, but it's. If I say something, I'm going to reflect it in a record. So, and I'm big on timelines. I think you've got to have a physical timeline in medical malpractice. So I use the timeline as sort of an anchor exhibit in opening that the jury can float back to at different points, even if I'm talking about something different. But it's really important to have a timeline. Quick point about that. Timelines. Are we okay next door? Okay, good. Thank you. Timelines are all about relationships. They're not about data collection. And sometimes people will make mistakes and they'll want to put every important data point on a timeline, and it looks like somebody shot it with a shotgun, just all this scattershot. It's all about this thing happened before this thing. This thing happened right before this thing, or this thing happened way before this thing, or this thing happened after this thing, or a whole bunch of things happened together at this point, nothing happened, and then something happened. So it's all about the relationships of the data. That's very important to use in opening, because the juries, I mean, we've been living with these cases for years and know the medicine so well and the details. Jury is just getting flooded with
You do
information.
timelines in opening?
I'll use a physical timeline in opening and just have it up on a stand. The way I set it up is I'll have a 55-inch flat screen TV, sort of like the one in the back of the room here, but just have that positioned beside me. On the other side, I'll have a tripod with the timeline and maybe a few other boards that I'm going to use, like particularly important medical record. But the general structure that I think is really helpful, I call it the, was anybody here last year? Anybody come to this last year? A couple of familiar faces. You're actually in my small group last year. But I call it the Netflix opening. And the reason I call it that is because I try to organize my opening statement in the same general story structure that Netflix uses in every one of their shows. I mean, it's kind of spooky. It could be Breaking Bad or Stranger Things or Better Call Saul, whatever it is. They did the same structure, and there's a reason, because it creates drama, it creates hooks, and it's interesting. It just pulls you in. And what they do is they will show a scene. It's not in time sequence. It's just a point of time where they'll show something that's compelling. If it's Breaking Bad, they show the scene of the RV racing through the desert with the dead bodies in the back and the gas mask and the guys in his underwear, and you're pulled in. And then that scene ends, and then the next scene usually goes further back in time and starts, and then, at least in Breaking Bad, the next scene is this sad science teacher, getting harassed by his students. But you always have that scene in the back of your mind. You're thinking to yourself, wait a second, how's this going to connect? What does this have to do with the RV and the poison gas and the underwear and all that stuff? So Netflix has this figured out, and I'm sure they're not the first. But what I do in opening statements, I try to adopt that same model. And I'll get up in front of the jury, and I've had the chance, I've had a lot of interaction with the jury at this point. So I've introduced folks, and I've got...
By the time you show the
By the time I get up to opening. So I don't have any agenda in opening other than to deliver the opening in the structure I want to do. And I don't even say good, I might say good morning, but that's literally, I don't waste any time with, nothing I say is evidence. I mean, God, just get that out of your dictionary. But the defense lawyers.
Why would you ever say that?
Well, these defense lawyers, in this trial last week, the guy's most experienced defense lawyer in Georgia, offices all over the country.
He undercuts himself.
He starts off, nothing I say is evidence, nothing he said is evidence, nothing. But I'll start off and I'll get up in front of the jury and don't say anything. And I just wait till I meet all their eyes, and I'll say sort of like I'll mouth good morning to them. I want to make sure everybody is looking at me. And there might be one person who's just waiting to hear some talking, and I'll sort of wait until he looks at me and I'll say good morning. And then everybody's looking, and then I'll step back aside from the TV, and then it'll fade in on the scene, the Netflix scene. And in the case I'm going to show this afternoon, it's a scene of a young woman with severe brain damage, and she's being walked through the house by her mother to try to get to the bathroom. So her mom's holding her arms. You see her name's Jenny. You see Jenny's beautiful face and smile as she's struggling to walk to the bathroom. And I don't say a word. I mean, just let that image kind of wash over the jury, and jury see it, and then it fades out. No comment on my part. And then the next thing I'll say, I'll move into, every year, hundreds of millions of people are affected by stroke, either directly or family member. Billions of dollars are spent in stroke research, treatment, rehabilitation. So now the jury knows this involves a stroke, they're hearing big anchor numbers, and you're sort of setting the pieces in place for the jury to understand how high the stakes are. And now the 200 million is still a big number, but they're starting to see that this is a real significant injury. But I like that structure, and then I'll go from the statistics part, the high framing anchor numbers, and then transition into the medicine.